Well, good morning, everybody. And I am so glad to be here. And I'm glad to get to see several people that I haven't seen in a long time. One of those is my friend Jim Hahn, who was the worship leader for many years at the Crestview Church in Waco, where I served for 20 years. It is so good to see DJ, and I love being around you, and I appreciate so much the way all of you served this morning. Thank you very much. And it's good to see Benjamin and Rachel Neely. I've known Benjamin for a lot of years, and one of the things I know that Benjamin brings to this church, and he's brought this to every church that he's served, is his genuineness. His genuineness. And I want to tell you, genuineness goes a long, long way. And I'm so glad, Benjamin, you and Rachel are here, and thank you for letting me spend the morning with you. Turn to Psalm 23 if you would. Psalm 23. DJ, I don't know this song you did earlier, the Psalm 23 song. I love that. Thank you. Long time ago, Charlotte and I lived in Middle Tennessee, and I was serving a church, a little storefront church there in Pulaski, and was learning every day that I had no earthly idea what I was doing. And it would literally be a day-to-day thing. I was 24 years old, newly married, and everything was new. There was a woman who began coming to our church who was 26, and her sister and family were a part of this little church. And Kay began coming to this church, 26 years old. And shortly after she began coming to this church, she found out that she had cancer. And it was very serious. And she fought that battle for a number of months. But there was a night when Charlotte and I were at home, and I got a call from the hospital in Columbia, Tennessee, just kind of down the road from Pulaski. Kay had been there about 3 or 4 days. And the voice at the other end said, she's not expected to live through the night. Could you come? And that night, I drove through the rain to get to this hospital, and I was wondering, what do I do when I get there? Got to the hospital, took the elevator up, and here were about 30 people in a dark waiting room, lights out, and just silently sitting there, much of that her family, just waiting. I stepped in the waiting room, and I stepped in Kay's room where her family surrounded her bed, stepped out of the room, and she died a few minutes later. I'm 24 years old, and I've been to school a couple of years at that point, or had some kind of Bible training a couple of years at that point. And I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. I grew up in Dallas, went to University of North Texas, got a degree in business, made a turnaround, and went to school for a couple of years at that point, and then Now I'm in a hospital and there's someone who's died and I wondered what to do, and I just kind of didn't know what. And the nurse came up to me and she said, "You're probably wanting to take the family to the chapel." And I looked at her and I said, "Yes." And so we got on the elevator, and the family was getting on the elevator, and down we went, and they filled up the little chapel, and I stood outside the door waiting for all the family to enter. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? Well, there was a stand in this little chapel, and a big Bible was open, kind of like this one, I think. And it was open to the 23rd Psalm. And I went to that stand, and I looked at all these people, and I looked at the text, and I began to read the 23rd Psalm. And then I prayed for a moment. That's been a long time ago. And I want to tell you, all these years later, I don't know that I would have done anything any different than to read that psalm at that moment. This 23rd Psalm is one we know. It's also one we need. The Lord. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Or the New Living Translation, I have all I need. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup, it overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This psalm is an invitation. It is an invitation to receive the overflowing grace of God. How much grace does God offer you this morning? Far more than you can imagine. Absolutely overflowing. If you're in middle school or high school, you may know what it means to hit some bumps in the road. For example, you just keep getting, you come in second place. You weren't chosen for the play. You're not chosen to start on the team. It's second place. If you're in your 30s or 40s, there are times when you look in the mirror and you wonder, why does marriage have to be so hard? Is it supposed to be this hard? If you're a grandma or grandpa, you wonder about that grandson of yours, that prodigal. Wonder, will he ever come back? Will he ever come home? And then there's that old son-in-law, that knothead. Is he ever going to is he ever just going to do right and go to work and just live a normal life? Some of you know what it is to have an appointment with the doctor. And when you left, you just sat in your car in the parking lot, wondering, what am I going to do? Some of you know what it is to be married to someone who looks at pornography. You wonder, how can this stop? Some of you know what it is to have all the hope drained out of you. At least that's what it feels like. But here you are again, needing a word of hope. This wonderful psalm is a psalm that invites all of us, middle school, high school, young adult, married, single, old, to taste the overflowing grace of God again. I love this. The Lord is my shepherd, verses 1 through 4. God provides. God provides. I mean, he provides so abundantly that when he talks about these sheep and how they eat, he says you look at them and they're all lying down in these green patches. They are full. God provides and leads them by quiet waters. God provides and refreshes my own soul. God is a shepherd who goes with us in dark places, much like a shepherd would then, as the sheep might wander, or the shepherd might lead the sheep through canyons, valleys that are dark. And the shepherd is there with his rod, his staff. Rod to fight off critters, staff to give some direction and some guidance, to steady his walking. This beautiful psalm says in the beginning that God provides. You look in the mirror, and I don't know what you see, but there are some days I've looked in the mirror and I just saw this discouraged man looking at me. And I wasn't smiling. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? Sometimes you look in the mirror and you see a disappointed woman. Sometimes you look in the mirror and you see someone who feels very, very alone. Sometimes it's just overwhelming. The good news this morning is that God's grace is abundant. God's grace is abundant, and that God provides. God provides. You know, if you leave this morning and you're just kind of here for a couple of things, this is one I would take away. I want to remember that no matter who I am, no matter how old I am, no matter the situation, that God provides. And he provides for me. A couple of notes here. God's provision does not eliminate suffering, does it? God's provision does not mean that all my problems are going to go away. You know, it was at the cross where Jesus said to the Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. I'm going to trust you, Father. And there are moments when you say to God, Lord, I don't know what to do. I'm scared to death. I'm out of answers. but into your hands I commit my life. And I trust you. I trust you. Isn't it odd you come to church like this? Y'all want to hear something new? You ever just kind of want to hear something new? This morning, we're not going to hear something new. We're going to hear something we need. What I'm finding in my own life is that I need to be reminded of things. I need to be reminded of things. And it's not so much that I've got this forgetful mind, though when it comes to my car keys, that is probably, I guess that's going to be with me always. I lose those things or misplace those things in our house. No, it's not like that. I need to be reminded that there's a reason to hope. I need to be reminded that there's a reason to smile. I need to be reminded that whatever problem I have, it is not bigger than the hope I have. That God's provision is huge, no matter what. But God's provision does not eliminate suffering and tough times. And then I want to tell you that God's provision is not just God's presence, is not just a feeling. Now, my feelings matter to me. Don't they matter to you? If you say something nice, I got a good feeling going on there. All right? If you say something rude or crude or whatever, I got a bad feeling going on there. Feelings, okay, that matters. But when it comes to God's presence, you can say, well, I just feel like God's present, or I just don't feel like God's presence. I get that, except that's not how God's presence is determined. God's presence is not determined by my feeling. God's presence is determined by His absolute authority and His promise to be present. And with those sheep, He has His rod and He has His staff. And He knows there are animals just ready to attack. So I got this daughter and son-in-law. They live in Edmond, Oklahoma. It's a suburb of Oklahoma City. And they've got a couple of acres. They're into chickens. Like chickens with names. And they've got these chickens, and there's chickens, little chickens and big chickens and brown chickens and black chickens and white chickens, and I don't know. At this point, I think there's about 21. And they've created this there's another string. I needed you. The brethren were taking strings off of me a while ago. I'm not sure where this one came from. 21 chickens. And you know what they learned? They learned that at night, there are sometimes animals who are preying on their chickens. Learned that about bobcats, and they learned that about coyotes. And you better know that about your children, and you better know that about your grandchildren, that the evil one is preying on them. And you better know that about you. The evil one. The evil one would love to destroy and kill and basically just ruin the life of one of your children or grandchildren. The evil one loves to break up families. The evil one loves to discourage people. The evil one would love to take away your joy and turn you into an old grouch. You don't want to die like that. And this promise here is that God will fight for you. God will fight for you. Don't you let a day go by without praying for your grandchildren or praying for your sons and daughters, even though they're adults with mortgages of their own. Pray for them. Fight for them. Fight for your spouse. And we do this kind of fighting through prayer because larger than the threat is the presence of God in their life. Well, finally, there's a shift in the image here to God as host. Chapter 23, verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You prepare a table before me. When I first started preaching, I would often preach at these churches where they were having these big church dinners, dinner on the ground, though it was on a table. But dinner, it was these big church dinners. And you could just see how much everyone enjoyed these big church dinners when the food just seemed to fill the tables. God's grace is like that. God's grace is so abundant. It is so big that you look at God's grace and you go, all this? Yeah, all this. And he's doing it in the presence of those who threaten you. He's doing it in the presence of your enemies. He's doing it at your worst moment. He's doing it when you're sick. He's doing it when you're discouraged. He is giving you a table that is spread and that is full. And it's to remind all of us there are dark valleys, there is evil, and there are enemies, but this will not discount the grace of God. That's good news for all of us. And finally, look at this last verse. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Surely goodness and love, surely goodness and mercy, surely God's goodness and God's love will follow me all the days of my life. God is in pursuit of you. You think you want to be a part of heaven and living with God forever? Oh, God wants that more than you do. He's in pursuit of you. You look on one shoulder and here's God's love. You look on the other shoulder and here's God's goodness. Constantly with you, pursuing you. And he says, you know, all the days of your life, God's goodness and God's love is going to be with you. Isn't that good news? It's good news for you. We were living in Kansas City, and there was a guest speaker coming to a school nearby where our church was. And I knew of this guest speaker, but didn't know, had never heard him. Charlotte and I went to hear him. And it was just one of those moments. It was I remember it was a cold day. I remember she was there with me as we heard him. I don't remember a thing the man said, but I remember this one story that he told. And I think about this story at times. So this particular man, Tom Long, was telling about teaching a class. And the class went on holiday. It was, I don't know which one, but it was some holiday. And all the students went home. One student was from Baltimore. He had been raised in Baltimore. Went home and said he was there with his mom and dad, and they were getting ready for lunch. And his dad said, well, I'd love to go on a walk before everything gets going for the day. And so they left early one morning to go on a walk. They were walking through a part of Baltimore that was familiar to both of them, as they were talking about a lot of things. The young man was talking about school. His dad was talking about Baltimore and some of the urban challenges. And they decided to walk through a park to make a call at a payphone. I'll come back to that in a moment. At a payphone. And this young guy says, out of nowhere, this man walked up to him and his dad, and he said, I just assumed he was probably a homeless guy, and he walked up to Dad and I, and he said, hey, you got some change you could spare? And he said, my daddy reached into his pockets and pulled out all the change he had and held it out to the man and said, here, take all you need. Well, he did. He took all of it. And so the man walked away, and the father and the son began to walk toward the phone, and it dawned on the father, I don't have any change now. There was an ancient thing called a payphone. Now, back in those days, this is long before cell phones, back in those days, everyone walked around in silence, looking up, not down, because no one had a phone. And there were these things, though, that were in parks and in different places where theoretically you would put money in and hear a dial tone. And I think it was a nickel at one time, and then it went to a dime, and it was a quarter in those days. So you got to have a quarter to put in this payphone to make it work. So the dad turns around and looks at the man walking away and says, hey, buddy, could I have a little bit of change? And they said that the man walked back to the father and son, reached into his pocket, and pulled out all the change and said, here, take all you need. That's our God. Our God this morning invites you and me to take all the grace we need. You say, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to get through the week. I don't either. But I know that by the grace of God, you can. That's good news. Let's sing.